Hi everyone, this is Gwen Saul, Curator of Ethnology at the New York State Museum. Thank you for joining me again for video number 2. Today I wanted to introduce to you some paintings and photography from our contemporary Native art collection and to think a little bit about what a Native art canon of iconic works looks like for what we think of as New York State. So I'm going to focus on Haudenosaunee, and I want to preface this by saying that there are 3 artists from the late 1800s, early 1900s, who really began the art of 2D, two-dimensional line drawing in Haudenosaunee communities. Sanford Plummer, Ernest Smith, and you can read more about them in this article, free journal access by Mohawk scholar Scott Stevens. And if you're curious what they look like, I have a taste. So these 2 pictures are by Ernest Smith in 1936, and they are in the Rochester Museum collections. But that gives you a sense of where Haudenosaunee 2D painting and drawing begins when we're thinking about an art history of Haudenosaunee art. So I'm going to start with some painters who are really well known and then branch out into some brand new people that you may not know about or have heard about yet, and I think you should. So here we go. We're going to begin with this beautiful piece, Acrylic and Pencil on Hot Press Paper by Piet Jemison. He's Seneca, Heron Clan, and this is titled 1687 War. Now, by 1687, Haudenosaunee people had dealt with and survived 6 different plagues, at least. So in the time of this pandemic, I think it's worth taking note that Haudenosaunee communities and Shinnecock communities today continue to thrive despite a history that has been marked by the devastation of plagues brought by Europeans. This particular painting by Piet Jemison depicts the French forces led by Denonville attacking a Seneca village that was near where present-day Ganondagan is located now. So the French were very upset that the English were taking away the beaver fur trade and working with Haudenosaunee people to get those pelts. And so they decided to attack the Seneca in retribution for their doings with the English. The Seneca got wind of this attack beforehand and were able to evacuate their village and even burn some of their buildings so that they wouldn't be completely destroyed already by Denonville. But it was a brutal battle, and Piet Jemison has depicted that emotional onslaught, that physical violence of what this encounter looked like. You may think to yourself that this looks kind of familiar, and indeed, this particular piece is done in the style of Pablo Picasso's Guernica, an artwork completed in 1937, I think, that was a commentary on the brutal violence against innocent civilians during the Spanish Civil War. And that painting, if you can Google it at home or think about it if you've seen it, really harnesses the emotional horror of what war and destruction brings. And I think it's no mistake, clearly, that Piet Jemison is using that same emotional reaction, absence of color except for the people, you'll notice, to talk about what that battle, that violent attack on Seneca village was like. You'll notice down at the bottom there is a face there. That's actually a real artifact that comes from the Fenimore Cooper Museum. It's a war club, and it's remarkable because it has a face carved in the ball of the club, and it shows the tattoo designs on the face that probably corresponded to the person who wielded it or owned it. So I also want to say that part of looking at Piet Jemison's work in the next painting, which I'm going to show you now too, which is by John Fadden, a Mohawk artist. Part of the reason I wanted to start off with both of these paintings is that we're really talking about authorizing Indigenous histories within art history and within Canadian and US history. And that's what these artists are doing. So here you see a depiction from a key moment in the epic creation narrative for Haudenosaunee people, in which Sky Woman, heavily pregnant, is fallen through a hole that was created by the uprooting of this tree in Sky World. And so there's her husband looking down, and that hole where the tree has been uprooted. And she's falling down into darkness. And as the story goes, various animals come to her aid, and she ends up landing safely on the back of a turtle, which is Turtle Island, and becomes Earth. And so you might hear your Native friends or colleagues talking about Turtle Island, and that's where this comes from. Like many important epic narratives, this story has a lot of deeply embedded philosophies in it that are instructional and informative even today for Haudenosaunee people. So next to this painting is actually a work by David Fadden, who is John Fadden's son, and I will make sure that the link to their museum is in this video. They are both from the Six Nations Museum in Onchayota, New York. So if you have, I'm sure many of you actually may have memories of going up there when a very famous person named Ray Fadden was in charge of the museum, and subsequently John and David and David's siblings have really taken over with that museum. It's an incredible space, and you might have gone to hear stories that they told or seen amazing art. This particular piece by David is called At the Social, and it really is about the singing and the dancing that is so crucial, so important, so central to Haudenosaunee community experiences. Really, music and dance is one of the first experiences that young people have, even as babies, even in the womb, hearing that music. And At the Social is a commentary on how central that is to Haudenosaunee people. And you may, if you ever have an opportunity to attend a social dance, I highly, highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun, and it's really a beautiful sort of gathering of community people. So next, we are going to look at something completely different. This is a painting called The Three Sisters by Erwin Printup Jr. He is a Cayuga artist who currently resides with family on the Tuscarora Nation. And you'll notice that he's chosen to depict the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, in a geometric abstract style. He's got these shadows, he's got these interesting cubes, and at the bottom you'll see that the designs in brown are reflective of the collars on Haudenosaunee pots. We have a comment that it looks like Minecraft. And indeed it kind of does. If you have an opportunity to travel out to Tuscarora whenever this pandemic ends, the local elementary school at the Tuscarora Nation has a lot of Erwin's work in it, and he's really recognized as a very well-known Haudenosaunee artist. He also illustrated a book on the Thanksgiving address that I will link as well in the video. But I wanted to share this with you because sometimes we have ideas of what Native art should look like. We think about beadwork, we think about quill work, we think about pottery. Haudenosaunee artists, Native artists in what is now New York have been exploring different mediums for a very long time. And that's what today is all about, looking at some work that is, with painting, with acrylic, with canvas, with oil paints, with photography. Again, authorizing indigenous histories and concepts into a larger art history that's perhaps we mostly assume is Western, but there are a lot of Indigenous artists now working in this medium too. So next up, we have this beautiful piece, Oil on Panel by LuAnn Redeye. She's a Seneca artist, and she's now teaching at SUNY Oneonta. She spent a long time working in the Southwest, which is where I had the privilege of first meeting her in her studio there. And this gorgeous painting is layers and careful layers of oil paint. And she has done it, as you can see, in the style of, using techniques that are mostly thought of as old world artist techniques. So careful layering of oil paints to get the shadows and the depth of the person in the painting, of the figure. This is actually a self-portrait of her, and it's called, and I'm going to butcher the name because it's in Seneca, Ageswe'gaiyo, which means born of the Hawk clan, which is Luanne's clan. And on the back, you'll see that she has this beautiful, vibrant tattoo that was inspired by Dia de los Muertos, which is celebrated in the South Valley in Albuquerque, where Luanne's studio was. And I just want to read a comment from her about her art, which is, "My artworks are from my gaze, and often an intersection of autobiography and community, where the surface becomes a window into the everyday life and familiar surroundings of the participating figures." And she's really motivated by this idea of disproving what other people think is authentic. There is often this discourse around Native people of what they should look like, what they should be doing, and then what's actually going on. And that corresponds with another Cree artist named Kent Monkman, who you may have heard of, whose works are now in the lobby at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, who also talks about how his work is authorizing Indigenous histories into this canon of art history. So LuAnn is really trying to also assert herself. So moving on, I want to introduce you to photography by a young Shinnecock artist named Jeremy Dennis. And I should probably stop saying young, but he's so accomplished that I can't help it. So I apologize, Jeremy. His work was most recently seen in a drive-by art event from Hampton Bays to Montauk, and it was reviewed in the New York Times on May 11th, so I encourage you to look for that article. I'll post that in the video as well. He recently finished a artist in residency program at the Indian IAIA in Santa Fe, which is a very well-known institution for Native arts. And this particular piece explores the violence or nonviolence of post-colonial Native American psychology. My work, Jeremy says, is a reflection of my experience and observations in my community, the Shinnecock Nation, which is near Southampton, and specifically the burden of loss of culture through assimilation, omission of our history in school curriculum, loss of land, and economic disadvantage. So the arrows in this photograph represent everlasting Indigenous presence. Jeremy uses non-Native models for his work, and that is on purpose. He wants to have all of us reflect on the fact that this history of omission of Indigenous peoples and histories is a burden that we both share. And how do we overcome that troubling past is the question that Jeremy asks. And asks us to think about in very provocative ways. His work can also be, you can Google him and find his website on this site, which I actually mentioned in my previous video, but I also highly recommend doing that. And I don't think I mentioned the title of this work. This specific work is part of a series, and it's called Nothing Happened Here, and it's the second in the series. So, any questions, or are we good?
A lot of great comments, but no questions so far.
That's all right. I'm hypnotizing people with art. I love it. Fantastic. All right, so we're going to end up with a photograph. This is brand new acquisition to the New York State Museum. and it is by Marjorie Skidders, who is a Mohawk photographer and journalist. And this is called Pow Wow Dancer, and we purchased this for the museum in 2019. And I know that sadly a lot of our events have been postponed or canceled, native art markets, and even community gatherings and powwows. And I know that's really hard because we all thrive on being able to see each other, to dance together, to eat together, to be together. And this is a really challenging time because we're not able to do that. And as the summer approaches and people are thinking about powwow and realizing that that's not possible, we're thinking of other ways to do that. And I know there's online powwows, but I wanted to end with this just to give a little bit of hope, perhaps, to what we can think about in the future when this is over and when we can once again gather together and sing and dance and enjoy each other's company. And the very last thing I'm going to point out is if you are interested in what I'm talking about, I want to recommend this magazine series, First American Art. They have excellent articles about Native artists all over the country. And this particular quilt is by Carla Hemlock. She's from the Guernica Mohawk Nation. And I hope that we'll be adding some of her work in the future. So on that note, stay well, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you.